So today I'm going to talk about my database of the nutrient content of Australian feed ingredients. So firstly, I'd like to say a big thank you to AgriFutures Chicken Meat for funding this project. So the aim of this project was to compile Australian and global data to create a database of commonly used feed ingredients within the Australian chicken meat industry. That was only the first part of the project. The second part was then to go further and evaluate the variation within feed ingredients for both Australian and global specifications, and importantly, identify areas for further study. So why is this variability important? Why are we bothering to have a look at the variation within our data? So this is an example that I like to share, and it shows a simulation of the non-phytate phosphorus content within diets formulated to 0.45% non-phytate P. So basically, when we formulate a diet, we're adding up the variability in our nutrients from all of our different ingredient sources. So when we formulate a diet, we're going to have a probability curve showing the probability that we're going to achieve that nutrient minimum. So we can see on this slide that with the red line in the middle, we have a 50% chance of attaining our 0.45% non-phytate P level that we wanted. And of course, we've got a fairly decent chance that we might get a value a little bit under or a little bit over. But what I'm really curious about is what happens if we get a value in the lower end or in the higher end. What is the likelihood of getting something like that, and what could that mean to industry? So that sort of brings me to a Poultry Hub project that I've been looking at the impact of variability on our formulations. So I had a look at crude protein in this experiment because protein is the most expensive part of the diet. So I found that within a standard Australian withdrawal diet formulated to 192 grams per kilogram crude protein, there's actually a 10% probability that your crude protein could fall below 182 grams per kilogram, and it may even fall as low as 162 grams per kilogram crude protein. And this was based off the variability in the crude protein of Australian feed ingredients that I got from my AgriFutures database. So this could reduce your gross margins from $1.42 per bird per cycle all the way down to 53 cents per bird per cycle, which overall means a $26,700 loss in gross margin from just one cycle of 30,000 broilers, meaning a reduction in profits of 63%. So this is certainly important for industry. While it is a small chance, if you just happen to get a diet that is way lower, it can certainly cost quite a lot. So because feed represents the primary cost of broiler production, uncertainty in feed formulation is going to be really costly, which is what we just saw. So this is why nutritionists use safety margins within their formulations. But how do you decide how big to make your safety margin if you're not sure about the variability in your ingredients? So of course, to ensure our requirements are met, we need to be able to accurately determine what the nutrient specifications of our ingredients are, and also the variability that exists. But Australian broiler nutritionists express concern because we don't have a lot of information on Australian feed ingredients, and assessing the reliability of this information is really difficult. So this brings me back to my AgriFutures project then, to build a database of Australian feed ingredients. So it started off with a survey of Australian broiler nutritionists to identify what ingredients they're most interested in, and also what nutrients. So then I contacted source companies to provide data for the database. So a massive thank you to Adissio, Ajinomoto, Cootamundra Oilseeds, DuPont, Evonik, Poultry Hub, Novus, Premier Nutrition, RCI, Feederpedia, and feedtables.com for contributing data. Data are also obtained from the literature where required. So from that, I collected obviously the means for the nutrients, but also the standard deviation for each nutrient and the sample numbers. And from this, I could then calculate the sample size that would be required to determine the mean value with at least 90% accuracy. So the database itself consists of 42 ingredients with 102 nutrient specifications for each ingredient, and it reports mean values, sample numbers, and standard deviations. And the data is grouped by each individual company. Then I also provide summary data for Australian and global data. So again, a massive thank you to AgriFutures for funding this study and to all of the companies that contributed. So if you want to just print screen, or you can contact me or Rochelle for these links, or just Google AgriFutures feed ingredient database to get either a PDF copy of the database, or it's also on the Extension Oz website, have PDF and an Excel copy of the database. So also, the more downloads we get, we may actually be able to justify making an app. So please feel free, download it and share it amongst your colleagues. So essentially, this is just some screenshots from within the database just to show you what it looks like. So we've got the different companies and their mean values for, say, in this example, soybean meal on the left, and all the different nutrients. And we also have on the right the standard deviations and calculations as to the accuracy of the data as well. So this is just a summary of some of the data within the database, just to show you sort of what it looks like. So this represents the mean crude protein level in ingredients, and you can see that the blue bars show the Australian data and the orange bars show the global. So we can see that we're missing some data for the Australian data, but mostly it's all there. Then looking at this graph, we can see the total sample numbers for crude protein for Australian samples in blue and global samples in orange. So obviously we're going to have a lot more sample numbers for the global data than Australian, just because we're only a tiny little portion of the world. If we then go and look at the standard deviation, which essentially means the variation within these feed ingredients for crude protein. So we can see in the global data in orange and the Australian data in blue. So generally, there's a lot greater standard deviation for crude protein in the global data, which makes sense because you're taking it from all over the world. There's going to be a lot more variation there. Interestingly, there's more variation within just the Australian samples within meat and bone meal. So once we've got that standard deviation data and we have the sample number data, we can then calculate what's the sample number required to get 90% accuracy in that mean value. So this is looking at the global data only, and this is for crude protein. So we can see that for pretty much every single ingredient, we have more than enough sample numbers to accurately predict the mean crude protein value for these ingredients. So that's really good. Then if we have a look at Australian data, we can see that in the majority of cases, there are enough sample numbers to accurately predict the mean for crude protein. However, there are some ingredients where the sample number required is actually higher. So for example, barley is one that really stands out, also lupins. So essentially there's a lot of variation within barley, and we need more samples in order to really pin down what the mean value is. But of course, nutritionists don't formulate diets to crude protein, they formulate diets to amino acids. And of course, crude protein is a much easier nutrient to determine and to analyze. So it's something that has a lot higher sample numbers. So then when we look at the amino acid contents, the total amino acid contents of our ingredients, particularly for the Australian samples, we can see that actually a lot of the data doesn't have enough samples in order to estimate the mean with at least 90% accuracy. So there's a lot more sample numbers required for things even like wheat, sorghum, triticale, barley, corn, as well as things like lupins and peas. So I went through and did calculations for all of the data in the database, which is also reported in the PDF and Excel database, in those databases. And so overall, only 13% of Australian data had enough sample numbers to meet the requirement for 90% accuracy estimation of the mean. Global data was better at 40%. However, you can see that there are still quite a few gaps within the database. So overall, we definitely have some excellent data, some really good Australian data, but we do need some more Australian specific samples because there are those gaps that we saw. So with the data, the standard deviation sample numbers and sampling methods are not always reported. So in particular, the standard deviations and sample numbers, for a lot of the ingredients, I couldn't get a really accurate reading on the number of samples that we need or that are missing, simply because not all databases reported these values. So they're really important. So once we have the standard deviations, we can really see the spread of our data and what kind of variation we're dealing with, and even build that into our formulations. And also improving sampling methods would also really help to reduce variation, and importantly, reporting the sampling methods used for databases as well. So thank you very much for listening to my talk, and I look forward to answering any questions.